John Carter, a renowned CEO and visionary in the technology sector, had it all: a brilliant career, a life of luxury, and a loving wife, Evelyn, who supported him in his most challenging moments. But pressure and ego led him to make unthinking choices, culminating in a bitter divorce that left deep scars. Evelyn, pregnant with a child John never knew existed, was forced to start again on her own. The restaurant was filled with golden lights and the soft sound of a piano in the background. The elegance of the atmosphere seemed to reflect John Carter's life: impeccable, under control, and full of appearances. He watched Lily with her charming smile and infectious laugh as they toasted a new $1 million contract that would guarantee another year of prosperity for his company. But behind that confident smile, John felt an emptiness he couldn't explain. Something about the evening bothered him, but he ignored the feeling, as he did with so many other things in his life. As Lily talked animatedly about a future trip to Paris, John looked away for a moment. That's when his eyes caught something that made him freeze. Behind the counter, with her hair in a simple bun and a worn-out uniform, was Evelyn, his ex-wife. His heart raced, but it wasn't because he was surprised to see her there. It was because of the obvious figure of a round belly under her apron. Evelyn was pregnant. The shock was immediate. John felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. He tried to look away but couldn't. There was something different about Evelyn. Despite the dark circles under her eyes and the tired expression, there was a determination in her face that he didn't recognize. She looked stronger, like someone who had learned to survive in chaos. While clearing tables and carrying trays, Evelyn didn't notice John's stare. Lily noticed John's distraction and frowned. "John, is everything all right?" she asked, touching his hand gently. "Yes, I just thought I saw someone I know," he replied, his voice tense. But Lily wasn't satisfied with that answer. She followed his gaze to the counter where Evelyn was standing. "Who is she?" she asked, her curiosity evident. "It's just nobody," said John quickly, trying to wrap things up. But inside, a whirlwind of emotions was consuming him. Who was the baby's father? How had Evelyn gotten to this point? She had nothing when they split up, and he, overcome with pride and resentment, had never looked back. Now guilt was eating away at him. When Evelyn finally noticed John, it was like a punch in the gut for both of them. Their eyes met for a brief moment, and a mixture of shock and pain flashed across her face. But Evelyn quickly looked away, pretending not to have seen him as she continued working. John, however, could no longer concentrate. He stood up abruptly. "I need a moment," he said to Lily. Without waiting for an answer, he made his way towards the counter, ignoring the curious looks around him. When he got close enough to call Evelyn, he saw the discomfort on her face. She tried to avoid him, but he was quick. "Evelyn," he said, his voice a mixture of authority and anguish. "Can we talk?" She stopped, but didn't look at him. "I'm working, John. This isn't the time to talk." "I don't care, this can't wait," he insisted, looking at her belly. "What's going on here? Are you—" Evelyn finally raised her eyes to him, and the fire in her gaze made him flinch for an instant. "That's none of your business," she replied coldly. "You've lost the right to ask anything about my life." John was about to retort when a customer called out to Evelyn, interrupting the tension between the two. She took the opportunity to walk away, leaving John with a million questions and a growing anger. He returned to the table, but Lily was already visibly irritated. "Are you going to tell me what's going on, or am I going to have to guess?" she said, crossing her arms. "It's nothing," John lied, but he knew that nothing could be further from the truth. Evelyn was pregnant, and somehow it affected him in a way he couldn't explain. As he and Lily left the restaurant, John couldn't get the image of Evelyn out of his mind. That night, he couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Evelyn, alone and pregnant, struggling to survive. And deep down, he knew there was something more, something she was hiding. The weight of what he had ignored for months began to fall on him. But what John didn't know was that this encounter wasn't just a fluke. It was the start of something much bigger. Something that would bring to light buried secrets, betrayals, and choices he could never undo. The next morning, John couldn't concentrate in the luxurious glass office of Carter Enterprises. He stared out at the cityscape without really seeing anything. Reports and contracts were scattered across the desk, but the image of a pregnant Evelyn cleaning tables insisted on occupying his thoughts. He needed answers, and he needed them now. John picked up the phone and dialed Victor, his best friend and personal lawyer. Victor had always been a voice of reason in John's life, someone who could balance his impulsive decisions with practical advice. When Victor answered, his voice carried a carefree tone typical of someone who had just come from a tennis practice. "John, what happened? You look tense," asked Victor. "I need your help," began John hesitantly. "It's about Evelyn." There was a brief silence on the other end of the line before Victor answered. "What about her? You haven't spoken in months, right?" "Yes, but I saw her last night. She was working in a restaurant, and Victor, she's pregnant." The words came out of his mouth like a weight, but admitting them only increased the knot in his chest. "Pregnant? Is that serious?" The surprise in Victor's voice was evident. "Yes, and I need to know if the baby is mine," said John, his voice wavering. "If it is, how could she keep it from me?" Victor took a deep breath before answering. "John, you know this isn't something she could hide forever. Maybe she tried to tell you, and you just weren't available." Guilt began to seep into John like a cold current. He knew Victor was right. After the divorce, he had completely closed himself off from Evelyn, blocking any attempt at communication. But even so, the idea of having a child he didn't know was something that made him furious and lost. "Can you investigate for me? Find out how she is, where she's living, if she really has anyone in her life?" John asked Victor. Hesitated. "Are you sure you want to open that door, John? It could bring up things you might not be prepared to deal with." "I need to know, Victor. I can't ignore it," said John firmly. Meanwhile, Evelyn was trying to get on with her routine. Working in the restaurant wasn't exactly the future she had envisioned for herself, but it was what she had. Every step of her pregnancy was a silent battle. The baby was growing inside her, reminding her daily of everything she had lost, but also of everything she still had to protect. She knew that John's appearance that night wasn't just a fluke, and that made her uneasy. After finishing another exhausting shift, Evelyn sat down on a bench at the back of the restaurant. The night air was cold but refreshing after the heat of the kitchen. She stroked her belly with a mixture of affection and concern. The baby was everything to her now, but John's presence had awakened fears that she had been trying to suppress for months. "Are you all right?" asked Amber, a work colleague who had become her only friend. Amber was a young woman with a generous heart, always willing to listen. "Yes, just tired," replied Evelyn, forcing a smile. "You're thinking about him, aren't you?" Amber asked sensitively. "It's impossible to hide. Who was that guy yesterday?" Evelyn sighed, knowing that lying would be useless. "It was John, my ex-husband." Amber's eyes widened. "The baby's father?" Evelyn hesitated before answering. "Yes, but he doesn't know, and I'd rather it stayed that way." Amber frowned, clearly worried. "Do you think he'll leave you alone after yesterday? Men like him don't accept being left in the dark when something like this happens." "I know," admitted Evelyn, biting her lower lip. "But I don't want him to be a part of it. He destroyed everything we had, and when I needed him, he turned his back on me." Amber placed a comforting hand on Evelyn's shoulder. "Maybe he's changed, but you need to protect yourself and the baby above all else." The next day, John received a preliminary report from Victor. It was brief, but enough to make him even more uneasy. Evelyn was living in a small apartment in a modest area of the city, working 2 jobs to make ends meet. There was no record of a new relationship and no indication that anyone else could be the baby's father. John's blood boiled. He didn't know if it was guilt or anger, but the thought of Evelyn struggling alone while he thrived in his luxury bubble was unbearable. He decided he needed to confront her again, but this time more clearly. He needed to hear from her directly what was going on. That evening, John went to the restaurant again. It was the end of her shift, and Evelyn was clearing one of the tables when she saw him approaching. Her eyes narrowed, and she shook her head, clearly irritated by his insistence. "John, what are you doing here?" asked Evelyn without disguising her tired tone. "I need to talk to you," he said, his voice laden with urgency. "Evelyn, this can't go on like this. I need to know the truth. The baby, is he mine?" She was silent for a moment, looking directly at him. The tension between them was palpable. Finally, Evelyn answered with a firmness that took him by surprise. "Even if it was yours, John, you don't deserve to be part of his life," she said. "You left me when I needed you most. Why should I trust you now?" John felt as if he'd been hit. "I've made mistakes, I know, but that doesn't mean I don't have the right to know if I have a child. Evelyn, you can't make this decision alone." She took a step forward, the pain evident on her face. "I made this decision alone because you forced me to. You abandoned me, John. I couldn't count on you before, and I don't think I can count on you now." The conversation was interrupted by Amber, who had come to collect Evelyn to finish an errand before leaving. Evelyn took one last look at John, a look that said more than words ever could. And at that moment, John realized that his son was truly his, and winning her trust again would be a tougher battle than he had imagined. Evelyn sat on a bench in the small courtyard behind the restaurant. The night was cold, and the air seemed to cut into her skin, but she didn't care. The work was over, and now all she wanted was a few minutes of silence before going back to her apartment. She ran her hand over her belly, feeling the baby's slight movements. A mixture of love and sadness flooded her. Amber appeared carrying 2 cups of hot tea. "Here, you need this," she said, handing Evelyn one of the cups. "Thanks," replied Evelyn with a weak smile. Amber sat down next to her, clearly hesitating before speaking. "Evelyn, I know it's hard, but you need to tell me what happened between you and John. Why are you so determined to keep him away?" Evelyn looked at Amber, her eyes filled with a pain that she had been holding in for a long time. Perhaps it was exhaustion, or perhaps it was Amber's gentle insistence, but for the first time, Evelyn felt she needed to get it off her chest. "John and I met when I was at the height of my career," she began, her voice shaky but firm. "I was one of the top marketing strategists at a multinational company. I loved what I did, and I was achieving things I had dreamed of for years. When I met John, he was charming, determined, and had big dreams. He said he wanted someone by his side to build a life with, and I believed that." She paused, her gaze lost in distant memories. "After we got married, everything changed. John started to grow rapidly in the company, and suddenly he became this powerful man, surrounded by important people. I was happy for him, but gradually I realized that my own life was taking a back seat. He asked me to leave my job to devote myself to our home, saying that I wouldn't need to work because he would take care of everything." Amber frowned. "You left your career for him?" Evelyn nodded. "Yes, I loved John, and at the time it made sense. But as the years went by, he started to change. The business trips became more frequent, the dinners became endless meetings, and the nights spent with him became absences. When I tried to talk about going back to work, he would tell me it was unnecessary, that I should focus on supporting him." She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the words that would follow. And then the betrayals began. Amber was shocked. "Betrayals? With other women?" "Yes," replied Evelyn, trying to keep her composure. "At first they were just suspicions. He was cold and distant when he was at home, always attached to his cell phone. But everything became clear when I found messages on his phone. He was talking to other women, planning trips and dates while I stayed at home alone. He said terrible things about me, that I was finished, that I was a leech, that I did nothing but spend his money. He talked badly about my family, made fun of me with these women." Amber's eyes filled with tears as she listened. "My God, Evelyn, how could you stand it?" "I couldn't," admitted Evelyn, her voice breaking. "One day I confronted him. I said I knew about the betrayals and demanded respect, but he laughed it off. He said that I had no idea how the world worked, that he was the breadwinner, and that if I wasn't happy, the door was open. That was the moment I knew our marriage was over." Amber held Evelyn's hand. "And you never thought of asking him for financial help after the divorce?" Evelyn shook her head. "I thought about it, but how could I? What he did to me destroyed me, Amber. He left me with nothing. I had no job, no savings, and I found out I was pregnant weeks after we divorced. My family had always supported me, but I never liked burdening them. I needed to find a way to support myself." She looked at Amber, her eyes shining with restrained tears. "This job was the only thing I could do after being out of the market for so long. I've humbled myself, demeaned myself, but I've managed to get a place to live with my baby when he's born. And now John turns up out of the blue, pretending to care. He doesn't deserve to be part of this, Amber, not after everything he's done." Amber hugged Evelyn, feeling the weight of the pain she was carrying. "You're stronger than you think, Evelyn. But if he keeps insisting, maybe you need to stand up to him. For your baby's sake, you need to make sure he never has the power to hurt you again." Evelyn nodded, but the thought of facing John again seemed daunting. He was persuasive, powerful, and had a habit of manipulating the people around him. She knew she would need to be stronger than ever to protect her and the baby from the past that insisted on resurfacing. That same evening, John was in his apartment, looking at the report Victor had compiled on Evelyn. The idea that she was working as a waitress made him uneasy. He couldn't understand why Evelyn hadn't asked for his help. Even after the divorce, he had enough resources to ensure that she never had to work a single day. He thought about it, but never stopped to reflect on how his words and actions had destroyed Evelyn's trust. He knew that if he wanted answers, he would have to confront her again. This time he wouldn't accept excuses or evasions. He wanted the truth, and he wouldn't stop until he got it. John entered the restaurant for the third night in a row. He knew his insistence was pushing the limits, but he couldn't help himself. From the moment he had seen Evelyn in that simple uniform, struggling to survive, he had thought of nothing else. This time, he was determined to get answers. He would no longer accept her evasiveness. He needed to know why she hadn't come to him, why she had completely excluded him from something as important as her pregnancy. Evelyn saw him as soon as he walked in, and her stomach churned. She knew he wouldn't give up so easily, but his presence there once again made her feel a mixture of anger and exhaustion. She tried to avoid him, pretending she hadn't noticed him, but it was impossible to ignore the imposing figure of John walking towards her. "Evelyn," he said, his voice low but full of determination. "We need to talk." She stopped, holding the tray in her hand so tightly that her knuckles turned white. "John, I told you I can't do this. Not here, not now." "I'm not leaving without answers," he said, stepping closer. "You can't keep avoiding me. I deserve to know why you chose to go through all this alone." Evelyn took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "If you keep insisting, you'll make me lose my job. This is all I have right now, John. Please, please leave before things get worse." "Lose your job? Evelyn, you don't need that. I can look after you. I can look after the baby. Why didn't you ask for my help?" He took a step forward, trying to touch her, but Evelyn stepped back. "You don't understand," she said, her voice laden with pain. "I didn't ask for your help because I don't trust you, John. Because you destroyed everything we had, everything I was, and now you think you can just show up and fix things with money? That's not how it works." John was about to reply when Amber appeared, noticing the tension between the two. "Evelyn, are you all right?" asked Amber, casting a disapproving glance at John. "Yes," replied Evelyn quickly, without taking her eyes off John. "I'll be right there." Amber, sensing the urgency, took Evelyn's arm and pulled her gently. "Come on, there's a table waiting," she said, clearly making an excuse to get Evelyn away from the situation. John stood by, watching as Evelyn walked away. His frustration was evident, but he knew that pushing her further at that moment would only make things worse. He left the restaurant, his mind buzzing with questions, and stood outside watching through the large glass window. Outside, he saw Evelyn going from one table to another, the forced smile on her face as she served the customers. She looked tired but still had a determination he didn't recognize. It was an image that contrasted violently with his memories of her before. Evelyn had been full of life, always with a sparkle in her eyes and ambitious ideas about the future. He had seen her as the perfect woman until he got tired of her perfection and started looking for excitement elsewhere. John leaned against the wall of the building, arms crossed, watching Evelyn as his mind took him back to the beginning of it all. He remembered the first time he saw her. Evelyn was a marketing strategist at a corporate event he was sponsoring. She was confident, articulate, and had an energy that immediately enchanted him. He fell in love quickly and intensely, and when they started dating, it seemed that nothing could keep them apart. Evelyn was the kind of woman who inspired those around her, and John felt lucky to have her by his side. Then came the wedding vows. He could still hear her words, spoken with tears in her eyes. "I promise to be by your side in all times, good and bad, believing in the man you are and the man you can become." He wondered how he had let it all fall apart as he watched Evelyn wipe down a table and smile at a customer. He felt something he hadn't felt for a long time: regret. He had underestimated her, treated her as if she were just another piece of his life, disposable when it was no longer convenient. But there, watching her work, he realized how strong she was. Evelyn was not the finished woman he mocked in his messages to his mistresses. She was a resilient woman bravely facing the world while carrying a child he didn't even know existed. He thought of the women he had cheated on Evelyn with. They all seemed fascinated by his position, his money, his influence. They wanted parties, trips, and the glitter that came with his name. None of them really cared about who he was or his dreams. They weren't like Evelyn. None of them had sacrificed anything for him, and now he was beginning to wonder if all those betrayals had been worth anything. Back in the restaurant, Evelyn felt John's eyes on her. Without looking away, she knew he was there, watching. Amber approached and said quietly, "He's still out there. Do you want me to call someone to get him out of here?" "No," replied Evelyn, shaking her head. "He'll leave eventually." Amber put her hand on Evelyn's shoulder. "Are you okay? He's really bothering you." "I'll be fine," said Evelyn, trying to convince herself more than Amber. "He's just trying to deal with the fact that he can't control everything." John stayed outside until Evelyn had finished her shift. He watched her leave the restaurant with Amber by her side, the two of them talking quietly. He thought about approaching her again, but something inside him stopped him. For the first time, he realized that maybe Evelyn was right. Maybe he really didn't deserve to be a part of her life, or her baby's life. As Evelyn disappeared into the night, John stood still, feeling the weight of his past actions. He knew he needed to change, but he didn't know if there was enough time to fix everything he had broken. John Carter's mansion was cold and silent despite its grandeur. The wide corridors and minimalist design seemed empty, reflecting the emotional state of the owner. He was sitting in his office, a glass of whiskey in his hand, but the drink didn't offer the comfort he was looking for. He had spent days mulling over his conversations with Evelyn, reliving memories of his marriage and questioning decisions he considered irreversible. The sound of an approaching car brought him out of his reverie. Lily. He knew he couldn't avoid that conversation any longer. Since they'd returned from the restaurant, he hadn't replied to her messages or answered her calls. He felt suffocated, unable to pretend that everything was normal while his mind was elsewhere. Lily entered the mansion with firm steps. She was dressed impeccably as always, but her face showed signs of frustration and worry. When she found John in the study, she crossed her arms and glared at him without hiding her irritation. "John, can you explain to me what's going on? Why have you disappeared? Why don't you answer me anymore?" asked Lily, her voice filled with a mixture of anger and hurt. John sighed, avoiding looking directly at her. "I'm sorry, Lily, I've been distracted." "Distracted? Is that all you have to say?" she retorted. "You disappear for days, ignore me completely, and now you give me this lame excuse. What's really going on?" John hesitated. He knew Lily was an intelligent woman, and lying to her wouldn't be easy. Even so, he tried to get around the situation. "I'm dealing with some personal things from the past. They have nothing to do with you." Lily narrowed her eyes, assessing his answer. It has to do with that woman in the restaurant, doesn't it? I saw the way you looked at her. Who is she, John? He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the question. Finally, he answered bluntly, She's my ex-wife, Evelyn. Lily's eyes widened in surprise. Your ex-wife? And you didn't think that was something important to tell me? It's not something I wanted to discuss, said John, running his hand through his hair in a nervous gesture. Things between us ended a long time ago. I haven't seen or spoken to Evelyn in 6 months. She blocked me from everything. It has nothing to do with what we have now. Has nothing to do with it? Lily let out a bitter laugh. She's pregnant, John. I'm not blind. I saw her belly. That's your baby, isn't it? That's why you're so stunned. John remained silent, and his hesitation was all Lily needed to confirm her suspicions. She shook her head in disbelief. You knew, didn't you? Or are you trying to find out? That explains it. You're pushing me away because you're obsessed with her, without knowing if the baby is yours or if she already has another man in her life. Lily, it's not that, said John, trying to calm her down. I still don't know if the baby is really mine, but if it is, I need to do the right thing. Do the right thing? So you disappear. You leave me with no answers. You don't answer me? Lily took a step back, her hands shaking with anger. Are you telling me that now, after all this time, you've decided to be a responsible man? Where was that sense of duty when you betrayed her trust? Or mine? The mention of betrayal was a direct hit. John tried to argue, but Lily wasn't willing to listen. You're a selfish man, John, she continued. You discard people when they don't suit you, and now you're trying to fix something because your conscience is guilty. I'm sorry, but I don't want any part of it. She turned to leave, but John grabbed her by the arm. Lily, please don't go. I need some time to think. I'm confused and I don't know what to do. You're confused? She said, letting go of his arm. I'll make it easy for you. Stay with your confusion. I'm out of it. Lily left the mansion, her footsteps echoing through the marble entrance. John stood alone in the study, feeling the emptiness expand around him. He knew Lily was right. He was selfish, and his actions always revolved around what was most convenient for him. The next morning, Lily made a decision. She needed to listen to Evelyn. She wanted to know the truth from her and understand why John was so affected. She decided to go back to the restaurant. Dressed discreetly, Lily entered the place, pretending to be just any customer. It didn't take her long to spot Evelyn, who was waiting on a table with a big belly and a tray in her hand. Lily watched John's ex-wife for a few minutes. Evelyn looked exhausted, but there was a dignity in her posture that Lily hadn't expected. Finally, she called out to her, You're Evelyn, right? Evelyn turned, surprised. Yes, can I help you? My name is Lily. I'm John's girlfriend, she said directly. Evelyn's face tensed, but she kept her composure. And what do you want from me? I want to understand, said Lily. I want to know why he's so obsessed with you, and I want to confirm that the baby is really his. Evelyn hesitated, but her patience was at its limit. Yes, the baby is his, but that doesn't change anything. I don't want anything from John, and you can tell him that. Even ask him to stop looking for me here. Lily was silent for a moment, assessing Evelyn. Finally, she said, I don't know how you've put up with so much. He used me just like he used you. And now... Before Evelyn could reply, Lily left. Shortly afterwards, she sent a message to John. I went to the restaurant and saw your ex-wife. She's pregnant with yours. I can't believe you'd abandon a woman like that, especially pregnant. I can only imagine what she's been through. You throw people away as if they mean nothing. I don't want to see you anymore. I'm leaving town. I hope that one day you'll realize how destructive you are to everyone around you. John read Lily's message sitting on the sofa in his mansion. Those words hit him like a punch in the gut. For the first time, he really began to reflect on who he was and how he treated people. He played with other people's feelings, always prioritizing his ego, his comfort, and his desires. Evelyn's face, struggling to survive while carrying his baby, wouldn't leave his mind. He remembered how she had abandoned everything for him, how he had betrayed and mocked her, and now Lily was right. He wanted to make things right just because he felt guilty. John put the phone away, his head between his hands. He needed to change, not for Evelyn, not for Lily, but because he finally realized that he couldn't go on being the man he was. He was destroying everyone around him, including himself. The clock on the wall ticked almost midnight when John, lost in thought, finally picked up the phone and called Victor. He needed someone to listen to him, someone who could give him practical advice and perhaps help him see a way out of the chaos he himself had created. Victor answered on the third ring, his voice a little sleepy. "John, is everything all right? It's late." "I need you, Victor," said John, his voice hoarse with emotion. "Can you come here? It's important. I'm not well." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line before Victor replied, "All right, give me about 20 minutes." A short while later, Victor arrived at the mansion. He found John in the study, sitting in an armchair with a bottle of whiskey on the table next to him, but with an empty glass. The expression on John's face was one of sheer exhaustion, as if he were carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. "Okay, John, I'm here." "What's going on?" asked Victor, sitting down opposite his friend. John rubbed his hands over his face before answering. "I'm broken, Victor. I think I always have been. But now everything is falling apart at once, and I don't know how to fix it." Victor leaned forward, attentive. "Fix what?" "Be straight with me, John. You called me here for a reason. Talk." John took a deep breath, trying to organize his thoughts. Evelyn. Pregnant, working in a restaurant, struggling to survive. I've become this person who plays with other people's feelings. I use people to make myself feel good, to inflate my ego, and when they're no longer convenient, I discard them. And the worst thing is that it doesn't make me happy. On the contrary, I just feel emptier. "Well," said Victor after a moment's thought, "the fact that you're acknowledging it is a big step, but acknowledging it isn't enough, John. What are you going to do about it?" "I don't know," John admitted, his voice almost a whisper. "I feel like I'm stuck in a cycle. Every time I try to improve, I do something worse. How can I change who I am? How can I fix all this?" Victor sighed, choosing his words carefully. "John, change isn't something that happens overnight. It's a process, and it starts with honesty, with yourself and with others. You need to admit your mistakes, and more importantly, you need to act to correct them. This doesn't mean that people will forgive you, but it does mean that you will start to become someone worthy of forgiveness." John was listening attentively to what Victor was saying until he spoke. "I've hurt her so much. She doesn't trust me. How can I even try to make amends with her? How can I get close to someone I've hurt so much? She doesn't want to see me at all." Victor looked at John seriously. "You start small. Don't try to fix everything at once because that will only seem forced and selfish. Show her with action that you're trying to change, not to make amends or assuage your guilt, but because you really want to be a better person." John shook his head, absorbing Victor's words. "And Lily. She left because she realized what kind of man I am. I think I used her, Victor. I wanted someone to distract me from the mess my life had become. But in the end, I only hurt her too." "Lily's an adult," said Victor firmly. "She made the decision to leave because she saw something she didn't want in you. That's hard to accept, but maybe she did you a favor. Maybe you need this time alone to really reflect without distractions." John was silent for a long moment. Finally, he looked at Victor, his eyes tired but with a spark of determination. "I want to change, Victor. I want to be a better person. I can't go on living like this." Victor nodded. "Then start. Don't wait for tomorrow. Don't wait for someone else to do it for you. Start now. And remember, real change isn't easy. It will hurt, but in the end, it's worth it." After the conversation, John felt a small sense of relief. It wasn't the solution to all his problems, but it was a start. He knew that the road would be difficult, and that he might never regain the trust of Evelyn or anyone else he had hurt. But he also knew that he had to try, not for them, but for himself. While Victor left, John sat alone in his office, looking at an old photo of his wedding to Evelyn. She had been radiant that day, full of hope and love. He wondered if one day he could recover at least a part of that connection. For now, he knew only one thing. He needed to start rebuilding his life from scratch, and this time, he would do it the right way. That night, John decided to start from where everything had fallen apart. He needed to face up to the man he had become and the damage he had caused. In his mind, Evelyn was the starting point. She represented not only his biggest mistake, but also his greatest opportunity to redeem himself. But before any attempt could be made to get closer, he knew he would have to face up to his own shortcomings. He woke up early the next morning, feeling a less oppressive weight on his shoulders. He picked up his cell phone and did something he had never done before. He booked a session with a therapist. He knew that real change would require more than promises to himself. It would require a deep understanding of his destructive behaviors. Over the next few days, John began to reconnect with aspects of his life that he had ignored for years. He reluctantly revisited painful memories, his darkest mistakes, and the choices that had turned him into the selfish, insensitive man he now sought to leave behind. A week later, armed with a new perspective, he decided it was time to take the next step, talking to Evelyn. But not in the restaurant. He knew that invading her workspace would only put her in a vulnerable position. He needed to do it in a place where she had control. He sent a short but sincere message. "Evelyn, I know you have no reason to trust me, but I'd like to talk face to face in an honest way. I don't want to force anything, just a chance to explain myself and listen to you. If you agree, tell me where and when would be best for you. If not, I'll respect your decision." John didn't expect an immediate answer, and it didn't come. He spent the rest of the day trying to keep his mind occupied, but anxiety was eating away at him. The idea that Evelyn might ignore or reject him made him uneasy. However, part of him knew that this was a possibility he would have to accept. Meanwhile, Evelyn was reading John's message for the fourth time. She was at home, sitting on the small sofa in her modest apartment. The message was unexpected, and her first reaction was to reject it immediately. But something inside her hesitated. "Do you think he deserves a chance?" asked Evelyn, looking at Amber, who was sitting on the other side of the room eating popcorn. "I think he deserves to hear some good truths, that's for sure," replied Amber, frowning. "But honestly, only you can decide. He was a jerk, but maybe he's trying to change. Just don't let him manipulate you again." Evelyn sighed. She hated the idea of giving John any kind of control or openness in her life again. But at the same time, there was a small part of her that craved confrontation. Not to hurt him, but to let go of the hurt she'd been carrying around for so long. Finally, she typed a reply. "Tomorrow at 3 p.m. in the park near my work. Don't be late." The next day, John arrived at the park before the appointed time. He was nervous, something he hadn't felt for years. Sitting on a bench, he watched the families around him, children playing and couples strolling hand in hand. The scene made him think of what he had lost, or what he had never had the courage to build. When Evelyn arrived, he stood up immediately. She looked tired, but there was a strength in her posture that made him feel small. "Thank you for coming," said John, as she sat down on a bench in front of him. "I came because I want to make things clear," replied Evelyn, crossing her arms. "But make it quick. I don't have time to beat around the bush." John nodded, trying to control his anxiety. "I just want to start by apologizing for everything. For what I did to our marriage. For cheating on you. For humiliating you. For not being there when you needed me most. I know words aren't enough, but I needed to say it." Evelyn remained silent, staring at him with an expression he couldn't decipher. "You destroyed me, John," she finally said. "You took everything I was from me. I lost my career, my pride, my faith in people, and yet I carried on because I had no choice." "I know," replied John sincerely, "and you're stronger than I've ever been. Seeing you in the restaurant, struggling, made me realize how selfish I am. I'm not here to ask for forgiveness or try to make things right between us. I'm here because I want to change, and you've shown me how much I need that." Evelyn watched him for a long moment. "I don't know if I believe you, John. You've always been good with words, But real change takes more than that. I know, he said without hesitation, and I don't expect you to believe me now, but I'm going to prove with actions that I'm different. I don't want to take anything from you or interfere in your life. I just want to be a father to this baby, if you'll let me. The words, "be a father," took Evelyn by surprise. For months, she had been preparing to raise her son alone, without imagining that John might want this responsibility. She hesitated, feeling torn between anger and the desire to give the baby the chance to have a father present. "I'll think about it," she finally replied, standing up. "But John, if you let me down again, there'll be no second chance." He nodded, feeling grateful for this small opening. "Thank you, Evelyn. And please let me know if you need anything. I won't interfere, but I want to be available." Evelyn didn't reply, just nodded slightly before walking away. John sat on the bench for a long time after Evelyn had gone. He felt that a small step had been taken, but he knew that the road ahead would be long and full of obstacles. For the first time in years, he was willing to face these challenges, not to save his image or assuage his guilt, but to become a man he could respect himself. The days following his conversation with Evelyn were a mixture of hope and self-evaluation for John. For the first time in years, he wasn't focused on million-dollar contracts or the luxuries of his life, but on trying to become someone who wasn't defined by his selfishness and pride. He kept his distance from Evelyn, fulfilling his promise to respect her space, but continued to reflect on his words. One night, while reading old emails and messages that he had ignored for years, John came across something that completely disarmed him. A letter that Evelyn had written at the height of their marital crisis. It was a letter she never gave him, but he found it among the divorce papers. The handwriting was unmistakable, and he began to read with a lump in his throat. "John, I still remember the man I fell in love with. He was kind, determined, and made me feel that together we could conquer the world. But that man has disappeared, and in his place has come someone who makes me feel small, useless, and unwanted. I've tried for so long to understand what I did wrong, but maybe the problem isn't something I can fix. Maybe you just never wanted a partner. You wanted someone to look up to while you chased your own dreams. And I did. But now I realize that I forgot my own in the process. I write this to say that I still believe in the man you could be, but I can no longer be who you want me to be. I deserve more than that. And you also deserve someone who doesn't have to sacrifice everything to keep up with you. I hope that one day you'll understand what you've lost, and I hope that day isn't too late for you to change." John felt the letter as a direct blow to his heart. He realized that Evelyn had always seen more potential in him than he had in himself, and he had thrown that away, thinking that her love would be eternal and unconditional, no matter how he treated her. John's days continued to be a journey of self-knowledge and regret. He had started to take small actions to try to help Evelyn, always respecting the space she demanded. He knew he couldn't force himself to be present, but he couldn't be totally absent either. John started buying items for the baby's trousseau, clothes and accessories that he thought were important. Instead of delivering them himself, he would ask the driver to leave the boxes on Evelyn's doorstep. He included short notes without pressure or demands. "I hope this can help in some way. Take care, John." Evelyn, although grateful, didn't reply to his messages or make any overtures to him. For her, accepting help was practical, but opening the door to John again was something she still deeply feared. With 2 months to go until the baby was born, John felt his anxiety growing. He didn't know what life would be like with a child, but he was determined to be there. He kept texting Evelyn, always checking if she needed anything. "How are you feeling today? If you need anything, please let me know. Do you have someone to help you with the shopping? I want to make sure you don't overload yourself." She read the messages, but hardly ever replied. Still, John continued, keeping his physical distance but always attentive. He often went to the restaurant where Evelyn worked, discreetly watching her from outside. He would stand across the street, looking through the glass as she served customers. He saw her struggling with slower movements and obvious signs of tiredness due to her advanced pregnancy. Amber, as always, noticed his presence. "He's out there again," she said to Evelyn one evening. Evelyn sighed, stroking her belly as she leaned back in a chair to rest. "I know," she replied without looking up. "Are you going to talk to him?" asked Amber. "No, he made his choices and I made mine," replied Evelyn, although there was a part of her that began to wonder if she was being fair. Almost 9 months into her pregnancy, Evelyn began to feel constant pain and difficulty doing her job at the restaurant. Finally, she decided she needed to stop. It was a difficult decision since she depended on that job, but her body couldn't take it anymore. John heard about it from Amber, who called him worried. "She doesn't want you to know, but she's in a lot of pain. She needs help now, John. And if you've really changed, show that you care." That same day, John offered to take her to a doctor's appointment. Evelyn was reluctant, but seeing her condition and Amber's insistence, she accepted. The appointment was a transformative moment for John. Sitting next to Evelyn, he heard the baby's heartbeat on the ultrasound for the first time. It was fast, strong, and filled the room with an energy he had never experienced before. He looked at the monitor, seeing the outline of the baby, his son, and tears began to run down his face. "That's him," said John, overcome with emotion, looking at Evelyn. She nodded, also overcome with emotion, but said nothing. Seeing John so vulnerable at that moment had shaken her more than she was willing to admit. After the appointment, John drove her home. When they arrived, he hesitated before asking, Can I see the baby's room?" Evelyn thought for a moment but eventually agreed. "Of course, come on." She led him into the small room she had prepared with great effort and economy. It was simple but cozy. The walls were a soft shade of blue, and there was a modest crib next to a rocking chair. John entered the room and stopped, unable to contain his emotion. The tears came before he could control them. He ran his hand over the crib, the rocking chair, and then looked at Evelyn. "You did it all by yourself," he said, his voice broken. I'm sorry for everything. You're incredible, Evelyn. I don't deserve any of this, but I want to be a part of this baby's life. I want to be a real father." Evelyn felt tears welling up in her own eyes. They were so close, and for the first time in a long time, she saw the John she had fallen in love with so many years ago. Before she could stop herself, she stepped forward and embraced him. He held her carefully, as if she were something fragile and precious. The next day, Evelyn went into labor. John received a call from Amber and rushed to the hospital, his heart racing with worry and excitement. When he arrived, he found Evelyn in the midst of contractions, surrounded by nurses. He held her hand, offering what support he could. "I'm here," he said, looking into her eyes. After hours of labor, the baby's cries finally filled the room. John could hardly breathe as he watched the doctor hold the baby, a boy, and place him in Evelyn's arms. She looked at the baby with tears streaming down her face, and John felt his heart break and heal at the same time. When Evelyn passed the baby to him, John held him as if he were holding the world. "Hi, little one," he said, his voice trembling. "I'm your father." He looked at Evelyn, still holding the baby. "Evelyn, I'm so sorry for everything. You're the most incredible woman I've ever met, and I should never have hurt you. I love you, I always have, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving that to you." Evelyn cried as she looked at John. She knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but at that moment, with the baby in her arms, she felt that maybe there was hope. "I believe in second chances, John," she said softly, "but you're going to have to work for it." John nodded, tears streaming down his face. "I will, I promise." And there, in that small hospital room, they began to rebuild something that for so long had seemed lost. The years passed, and their lives took an unexpected turn. That man, once consumed by pride and selfishness, was genuinely transformed, showing that real change is possible when there is dedication. The couple rebuilt their relationship with patience and determination, overcoming hurts and healing wounds that seemed irreparable. Evelyn, who had previously carried the weight of so many disappointments, saw in her husband a rebirth. He became more than a companion. He became a partner in every sense, an example of empathy, commitment, and unconditional love. Little by little, she allowed the walls around her heart to come down, rediscovering the man who had once made her believe in shared dreams. Their son William, named after Evelyn's father who always believed in second chances, grew up surrounded by love. His father was his inspiration, present at every moment, from his first steps to his small daily triumphs. Sleepless nights, bedtime stories, and impromptu games in the backyard became part of a routine that he embraced with joy. The couple renewed their vows in an intimate ceremony surrounded only by those closest to them, celebrating not only their love, but the journey of overcoming that had brought them there. William, his eyes shining with pride, held the rings as the link to a new beginning built with mutual effort. The home they had created was full of laughter and learning. The lessons of the past became the basis for a more solid relationship, where respect and care guided every decision. Evelyn knew she had made the right choice by making room for change, while he never failed to show, day after day, that this second chance was the most valuable gift he had ever received. Their happiness was silent but powerful, built not on perfection but on love, redemption, and a deep understanding of what really matters. Together, they wrote a new story, proving that sometimes forgiveness can pave the way for an extraordinary future. John and Evelyn showed us that even the deepest wounds can heal when there is effort, repentance, and a new chance to start again.